Then There's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus discussing their lives, legislative priorities, policies, and other issues that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. This is our 100th episode of Then There's California. We decided that we wanted to do something unique and special for the 100th episode, and ultimately all roads of our episode 100 idea brainstorming led to the top. Best executed and celebrated by some sort of involvement from our fearless and extraordinary Senate leader, Pro Tem Toni Atkins. And in addition to her notable championing of the LGBTQ community, reproductive rights, affordable housing, the environment, healthcare, veterans, Pro Tem Atkins is also, as she has mentioned on this podcast in the past, a prodigious baker of pie, having reached her apex of pie baking during the downtime imposed by the pandemic. But she continues, thankfully for all of us, post-COVID, to bake pies for loved ones, friends, legislative colleagues. They are absolutely delicious. And so we thought it would be a wonderful idea to invite Senator Atkins to join us to celebrate pie, to talk about and even eat pie. And Senator Atkins has graciously baked us a pie for this milestone podcast episode. And so we are proud to mark episode 100 of Then There's California with the privilege of having pie with the Pro Tem. And the Honorable Senate Pro Tem Toni Atkins really needs no formal introduction, but it's still always important to showcase that Senator Atkins is not only the first member of the LGBTQ community to serve as Senate President Pro Tem and formerly as Speaker of the State Assembly, but also the first woman to serve in this leadership capacity here in the Senate. And she represents the 39th Senate District down in San Diego, but she has, of course, affection and pride for the whole state of California. And we are privileged to spend episode 100 with Senate President Pro Tem and her homemade pie. Madam Pro Tem, good to see you.
Well, Brian, thank you for that introduction. I hope the pie and the interview lives up to that.
I was kind of amazed when we thought about this. I remember you were doing this in the pandemic, and I thought, now that we're all back, it's post-COVID, she doesn't have time to be baking pies. Well, surprise, surprise, you are still doing it post-pandemic. What compels you to keep doing it?
Well, a couple of things. One, I have a lemon tree, I have a lime tree, and I certainly thought I'll put those lemons and limes to good use with key lime pie and lemon meringue. Turns out you don't need as many of those lemons and limes to make the pie, but I got hooked on it anyway because people seem to enjoy getting a lemon meringue pie or a key lime pie. But of course, my personal favorite is egg custard because it was my mother's favorite pie. And of course, in May, we celebrated what would have been the 92nd birthday for my mom. My sister and I have an annual tradition where we get together, we do that. We listen to Dolly Parton, we play Yahtzee, and we eat egg custard pie. My mom was a Southern woman, and Southern women cook. And so the connection to food, I know many cultures are connected to food. It's how you communicate. It's how you welcome people into your home. And that was my mom. She welcomed people into her home with food. And so it's sort of serendipitous that, I've now taken to pie baking.
Let's have some pie. Thank you for baking this. This is your egg custard pie.
Egg custard, though, is an acquired taste. Most people look at me like egg custard. And I found that here, obviously, flan is a big. And flan, when I first moved to California and couldn't find egg custard, flan was sort of the thing that reminded me of egg custard. And then I learned that the API community actually has a love for egg custard tarts.
Okay.
So it's kind of interesting when you go culture by culture what the thing is.
Well, I was originally going to bring some Cool Whip or some whipped cream or some fruit topping, but I didn't know if you would consider that compromising a work of art.
Well, from the South, we would call that sacrilegious.
Yes,
but you're way more diplomatic, and that worked much better.
We are going to give this a try.
I don't get high marks in the pie cutting.
I had read somewhere that perhaps pie's most enduring comfort comes not from the pie itself, but from the heart of the baker, and that it is simply not possible to bake without loving care. You have given us examples of that already with this pie.
Well, thank you. Again, egg custard is my favorite, and I had to make it because I've never seen it sold in Southern California. Yeah. So what can you do?
Well, let's have a little piece here. How do you make this? Feel free to talk with your mouth full. Mm-hmm. How do you make this?
Egg custard is actually pretty easy to make. I had no idea. Of course, what goes into it is eggs, sugar, vanilla, And of course, you top it with nutmeg as you put it in the oven. So it's pretty easy to make. It doesn't take long at all. The hardest part is probably the crust.
And once you try some of the crust.
I think the harder pie to make, I would say key lime is the next easiest, followed by lemon meringue has more ingredients and more work. And then, of course, butterscotch is takes a little longer. You have to have a double boiler and a little bit more extensive.
Wow. Now, I don't know if I've ever had butterscotch pie, but that just sounds equally...
Well, do you like butterscotch?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Butterscotch Lifesavers,
right.
Butterscotch candy, yeah. So
of course.
I've forgotten how sweet this is. It's very sweet, which is really good. So your dad was a coal miner. Your mom was a seamstress. Who actually did the cooking in your home? I assume it was your mom, but...
Oh, my mom.
But did you and your sister help cook as well?
Well, mostly we cleaned up. But, that was fine. My mom was an incredible cook, and my sister has picked up that skill. Me, not so much. My spouse is the person that cooks in our household, so I still do the cleaning. So when I started to make pies, she was astonished. She couldn't believe I was going into the kitchen, but she enjoyed it. And then she said for our diets, that I couldn't give her any more pie, that I had to give it away.
But that's the great opportunity. You can share it then. You don't have to keep it at home.
Absolutely.
Well, thinking in particular of Caroline Menjivar, who we had on this podcast a couple of episodes ago, and pie and food and some personal passions, she said that food was part of her family's love language. She said that her mother's love language was, what can I make for you? What can I get you to eat?
Well, absolutely. My mom, that's how she welcomed people again into the home. We had a garden, we lived rurally, and harvesting food was really, really something that was a big part of our lives. And I love to eat. Who doesn't love to eat?
Amen to that.
I love to eat. I just think it is a statement. It does say something. When you prepare a meal with thought and love, and my spouse does that. She's an incredible cook. Again, egg custard is an acquired taste, so I'm learning people in the capital that eat egg custard. For example, Shannon Grove loves egg custard pie, and her mother loved egg custard. So it's yet one more thing we share in addition to the Imagination Library and Dolly Parton.
Well, thank you for that segue. I want to talk about the Dolly Parton Library, but I also want to talk about one of the bills that you are authoring this year, your SB 447, that seeks to build bridges with folks in Middle America to be more inclusive and understanding. So you're building a bridge here with food and with pie, but now you're trying to do it with policy and philosophy and attitude and example. Talk about your bill.
Well, 447 is a bill that would effectively undo the travel ban that we have in California, but it's more than just reversing course or making a pivot there. It's really about opening hearts and minds. More than 23 states we are not able to travel to in California because they have discriminatory policies against LGBTQ plus people. And that's a lot of states. That's almost half the states in our country. More than 450 pieces of legislation that are anti-gay. And so clearly the ban is not doing what we had hoped it would. Originally it did. It brought notice to the issue of discriminatory policies in states like North Carolina, Georgia. And so there were ramifications originally. The NCAA wouldn't go play there. Noted songwriters and artists, Bruce Springsteen, canceled a concert there. So this bill would talk about a campaign across the country to promote love and peace and kindness and acceptance, because I really think it's opening hearts and minds that will make the difference. If you know someone who's LGBTQ, you're less likely to have thoughts or policies against them because you know someone directly. It's kind of like sharing pie. If we share pie together or food together, a meal together, then we're open to really understanding more about each other. And so I think it does sort of go together.
It's kind of a risk in assuming and hoping that those who don't share philosophies and beliefs and attitudes are going to embrace this trust and this outreach.
True. But, there have been studies that show the single biggest factor in someone becoming more accepting is actually knowing someone, having an investment in a relationship. It's true for my family. I was raised in the church, Pentecostal holiness, very strict literal interpretation. And my parents, when I came out to them at age 18, they didn't understand it, but they love their child. And
Right.
so I have never, as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, my heart hurts for members of the community who get disowned or kicked out or ignored by their families, because that wasn't my experience. I am so grateful. I'm so fortunate that even though I grew up in a conservative, rural, Southwest Virginia community, a member of a Pentecostal holiness faith, that my parents still loved me. And it won't change everyone's mind. It won't open every heart and mind. But I think if you look at what we see across the country, most people are more accepting, and they become even more so when they're invested in the people they know.
Has this travel ban, has it hurt California and the LGBTQ communities here and their interests more than it has helped symbolically? And maybe it does send a message, but is it compromising and hurting and making dynamics awkward for people here in California and the interests of the LGBTQ community?
Brian, it's a good question, and I think there's room for discussion and debate there. But I do think the cumulative impact of our not being able to travel, with sanctioned by the state, and the state to pay for that travel if you are conducting work in one of those states, it's difficult. I mean, some of the very nature of the studies that researchers have wanted to do. Take North Carolina and the bathroom ban, which is why we initially did the ban to affect North Carolina. A researcher couldn't even go there to do follow-up data from one of our universities. And, that's a piece of it. Our sports teams couldn't travel. More importantly, you mentioned reproductive rights, which I did Proposition 1 last year. We also, in the budget, gave money to help individuals come to California. Well, they could come to California, but we couldn't send them home to that state, which was banned in terms of using state dollars for travel.
Right.
But I think it's more deep than that. It isn't just about the logistics. It's about having the ability to support a community there where they are, and to be a visible example of someone from California that has a different set of values and is more accepting and open, and the policies reflect that, to be able to transport that and support communities at home where they live. I think about the 17, 18-year-old girl that I was in Southwest Virginia, and I always, even then, saw California as a beacon. I was a teenager when Harvey Milk was elected to the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco. I paid attention to that. It mattered to me, and I thought, wow, there is someone who was elected to represent a constituency, and he's gay, and it's okay. And California, we have issues. We still have pockets and places where people are not accepted, and where there is hate. We've seen that against the API community here. We've seen it, African-American community. We've seen it. And so we have our own work to do here. But I also think that most Californians, if you look at what we've done in terms of policies and what we've supported legislatively and constitutionally, we support diversity. And I think that's something that is worthy of exporting to other states.
We are getting ready to go into Pride Month as we speak, with many in the LGBTQ community fighting for their lives. We are celebrating diversity and freedom, but simultaneously fighting for equality, for survival, for gender identity freedom, against transgender bias and all these policies across the country. It seems like the community is fighting for its existence. So there's this contrast between wanting to celebrate, but also needing to be on the defensive or the offensive.
And our community is used to doing both. We celebrate our victories, and yet we continue to fight. And you talk about the broad diversity of the LGBTQ plus community, our trans siblings. A number of years ago, I did a bill, the Gender Recognition Act, which was to give people the ability to say who they were and have their identification match their state identification. And young people came out of the woodwork to tell us who they were. And I think they've always told us. I think we weren't always listening. And so you've seen those freedoms expand. And as those freedoms have expanded and the acceptance has in many ways grown, there's a backlash. I see these so-called culture wars, we are for the first time starting to lose rights that we had fought to gain, not just for the LGBTQ community, but women. You see the backlash against communities of color. These are things we have to continue to work towards. And the LGBTQ plus community, we will celebrate. We will celebrate at Pride, and we will double down, and we will increase our efforts and our work and our support, particularly for the trans community who we are seeing suffer across this country.
Well, I noticed the theme for Pride, at least in Washington, D.C., was peace, love, and revolution. And that really summarizes the story and the history of Pride Month, really, since the beginning.
It does. And I just am so proud of the community I belong to because of their continued work to embrace, open to all of the diversity. It's a big community. And I'm just proud of the work that we've done. We will not step back. We will support the trans community across this country and young people. Young people, it's our future, but it's our today. Because how young people feel about all kinds of things, climate change, acceptance of diversity. I have a lot of faith in that, a lot of faith.
We are eating pie, but talking about some heavy-hitting issues here. But since I have your time, I wanted to ask you about the SCOTUS ruling regarding the abortion drug. The ruling, in some ways, was considered a surprise, considering the original oppressive ruling last year and the Dobbs decision, especially in light of the ultra-conservative makeup of the court and that ruling. Was it a surprise to you?
Well, given the Supreme Court and Dobbs, I absolutely didn't anticipate they would do this. But it's not cause for celebration long term because I still believe we are in danger. And hopefully the science will rule and that they've taken a pause and they will see that, you know, there may be even further a backlash against the Supreme Court and those restrictive policies should they go that far. This is a drug that's been available in this country for 20 years. It was available for a decade longer in Europe. A German-based company, RU486 was the original name of the drug.
Right.
It was used first and primarily in France. The French health minister said this is a moral imperative for women. And so thousands of studies across the globe, the World Health Organization listed this drug as an essential drug. So how, in the face of that and our own FDA, can they reverse course? That is just unheard of. It's never been done.
You could look at the bigger picture, too. The recent controversy surrounding this has brought this alarm that the next front in the war on women is going to be contraception, that a lot of the religious conservatives look at contraception and abortion as two sides of the same coin. Which
is exactly why we were 100% going to add contraception into our state constitution along with the right to abortion. And I mean, I read, I know it came out as a series and a show, but I was in college and read The Handmaid's Tale. And I can't watch the show now. Forgive me, producers. It's a wonderful show. I can't watch it because it is too prescient of something I never thought would happen. It's ultimately the control of someone's life, women in particular, and their ability to have self-determination. And I've always trusted, I am a woman, I've always trusted women to make the best decisions that they possibly could make. I ran a clinic that provided a range of health options for women, all the options. And I know the struggles that women go through to make these determinations. They're serious. They do it with support. Hopefully they have the support, but almost all of the time they have someone who is supportive of that decision and their determination. And so it's a core issue. But it is frightening when you see that, Brian. It really is.
Well said. We talk about women, and let's talk about and celebrate the number of women in the California State Legislature and the Legislative Women's Caucus. Record-breaking, extraordinary numbers here. Give us your take on this new class. The diversity, many of them have had this extraordinary life journey. Do you feel this special empathy and affection for them in particular because of their diverse and human paths?
Well, I think it's amazing that the legislature now more closely mirrors California and California's diversity. We haven't achieved every milestone, but when you look at and you see that we have the largest number of Latinas, we have a significant number with room to grow, obviously, in the African American community, the API community. Women, highest number ever of women legislators. And I think for the first time, to your point of diversity, a Muslim and a Sikh serving, and they're both women.
Right.
And the LGBTQ caucus is at 12. That's 10% of the legislature. And that's amazing. So I am incredibly proud. Of course, I know all the senators, but I think we're still getting to know many of the assembly members. It's a bigger house and a large number of new members there. It's exciting. It's exciting. And you're starting to see the policies follow that diversity. And I think that's what we've really strived for.
Let's talk about Dolly Parton.
Oh,
it is no secret. It is no breaking news. We all know that you love Dolly Parton. And in fact, you authored a bill, as you mentioned, with Senator Grove, signed into law by the governor to bring the Dolly Parton Imagination Library to our state. So talk about that bill, but why was this particular project so important to you? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear in terms of your love with Dolly Parton.
Well, I think the program is incredible. The Imagination Library, it's about literacy. It's about helping kids learn to read. And she grew up in a community where the educational opportunities weren't what she thought they should be. And her father, she did this. Her father said, "This is the greatest thing you've ever done." And so in California, we've just increased the Imagination Library as we implement it by 2 million kids. And I would tell you, I love this in particular because Dolly's doing it. Let's just be clear.
Sure.
But two, I grew up learning to read. It was the one thing. We talk about food, and my mother's providing food with a lot of heart and love. But my mom and dad, we didn't have a lot of money, but what we did have was the ability to read. And so my mom always had a library card. We always went to the library. We were always reading. And so both my mom and dad imparted a love of reading. And so this sort of brings my world together with someone that I admire and respect and really like, Dolly Parton, and enjoy.
Yes.
I mean, she is everything into one. And if you look at SB 447, the bridge piece of legislation, if you look, I just saw a billboard of Dolly in San Francisco, Los Angeles, where there's a picture of her and she says, "Be kind." I mean, you know, I think she espouses all of those values that I think are so important.
And that's why you're such a fan. Notwithstanding the Appalachian kinship, perhaps, but...
The woman plays, you know, at one point in a concert, I think I counted 5 instruments. She's fun. She's thoughtful. She's brilliant. She's funny. She's a good businesswoman. She is the epitome of a strong woman and quite a role model throughout the country. I just think she's incredible. And she continues to contribute and give. During the pandemic, the Imagination Library, she gave $1 million to Vanderbilt in Tennessee for research.
Into vaccinations, wasn't it?
Vaccinations.
Yes.
She got her vaccine, you know, on air. But nobody does it like Dolly.
How many concerts have you been to?
Not nearly enough. Not nearly enough. 4 or 5, but I have all of her music. Well, most of her music. And don't ask me my favorite song, because every time I list, you know, with most people I have a top 3.
Yeah.
With Dolly, it's sort of like a top 20.
Got it.
And I get text messages. When I said what my top 3 songs were and it went into print, I got text messages and emails from so many people telling me I'd forgotten this song, I'd forgotten that song. I'm like, oh, you're so right. So you can't have a top 3 or a top.
Well, I've loved her since I remember in the 70s. She had a little half-hour syndicated TV show where she would sing her songs. And then I remember all the stories with her and Porter Wagner. And the country western glass ceiling that she had to shatter to show her affection and love for him and how he helped her career, but distance herself and become an individual artist. Do you remember that?
Of course. You know, we watched the Porter Wagner show every week, and she was a sensation. And to watch her become as successful all these decades, I mean, it's just wonderful to see. And mainly because we grew up not far from each other, you know. It's a shared experience of Appalachia and hillbilly culture. And, you know, so it's wonderful to see someone succeed. Because, you know, growing up, I wasn't sure I would. I didn't think the world was about me. But she was different. She knew the world was going to be about her. And she had that strength. So an incredible role model.
And she wrote about that in her music, like Coat of Many Colors, that song. I mean, you probably could identify with...
that is one of my top three, Coat of Many Colors. Because I mean, I have a similar story. My mom made something we didn't have the money to buy. My mother was a seamstress, a garment worker, and she could sew. And she made not a coat of many colors, although that pulls in the religion,
right.
Joseph and the Coat of Many Colors,
right.
which I learned from the earliest age. So it's a beautiful song. But my mom made me a swimsuit to take to camp. We were able to go to camp through the courtesy of a local church, and I didn't have a bathing suit. And my mom made one. And if I had that today, it was so cool. But it wasn't cool when you were 8 years old and all the other kids made fun of it. So
sure.
So a shared story.
Well, I remember Love is Like a Butterfly and Jolene.
Everyone does Jolene.
Yeah, that's a great song. And
It's a great
Islands in the
song.
Stream, her duets were great. And then there was Daddy Come and Get Me.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, gosh, that's a sad
It's not
song.
a pretty song, as I told the
Daddy Come Get Me out of the mental hospital that you put me in. It's sad. Very sad.
But that was a story from her family.
Yeah.
I mean, she wrote about what she knew, and she did it unapologetically and just put it out there. I mean, another difficult one is The Bridge. So
Yes.
you got, but then she does these great songs. Oh my gosh. I love her version of Rocky Top, Mule Skinner Blues. There's just so many.
And see, I always loved her version of I Will Always Love You. I know Whitney Houston knocked it out of the park and made everybody, both her and Dolly, rich, but still, Dolly Parton's version of it was so innocent and sweet before Whitney Houston came along.
Well, it's great when you see wonderful artists take a song and run with it. And I think Dolly was appreciative. She does another good one, Hard Candy Christmas. See, we could spend another hour and we could just go into...
And that's what I love about this podcast opportunity. Have you ever, you've listened to her music all your life. You've been to not nearly enough concerts, apparently. Have you ever met her?
No.
And
I will tell you, I'm not someone that tries to meet every famous person. I don't, I don't want to bother people.
But her.
But Dolly, that would be different. I would have to say hello to Dolly.
Yeah. Well, Jane Fonda, who I know you have met, she just did an interview recently, and she was in 9 to 5 with Dolly Parton back in the 1980, hard to believe it. And she actually got Dolly Parton cast in that movie, and Dolly loved her for that, and they became best friends. And Jane Fonda said that she, of course, like you, thinks Dolly Parton is amazing. She's kind of psychic. She says she's very profound, but she tells the story of wanting to do research for this movie, The Doll Maker, about this long-suffering wife of this backwoods Kentucky family. She was a talented woodmaker, and she wanted to go out there and do studies and live with someone who lived in a holler, no electricity, and she asked Dolly to help her. She said, "You are the only person from the Deep South that I know." So she toured with Dolly through the rural areas and on the road, and playing for people who lived in hollers. Those are Jane Fonda's words, with the tar paper shacks. And she said that during the entire time, she never saw Dolly Parton not looking 100% Dolly, the wig and everything, and that people loved her, that she presented herself
an ambassador. She's an ambassador for Appalachia.
And that Jane Fonda said, she knows how to do it. You love the people who love you, and you love the people from where you came, and that she's authentic. And I bet when you do get to meet her, she will love you and appreciate your authenticity too.
Brian, I think so. I appreciate what she's done for all of us. There is a stereotype of what it means to be Appalachian, and I think, or a hillbilly, and I think Dolly has turned that on its head, and for that I appreciate her.
Just a final thought here. Last couple of years have been crazy, not to mention with the pandemic, but climate impacts, housing shortages, fights over reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, gun violence, a lot of challenges ahead. I mean, you couldn't cut up this pie proverbially into enough pieces to represent all of the challenges that you and your colleagues face. How do you keep your faith and your spirit and your will through all of this? It's never a down time. It's never a calm time. There's always some sort of crises or problem waiting in the wings, if not already been in the wings and needs to be addressed. How do you do it?
Well, music is a motivator. It sustains me. It really helps me have strength. And I think I'm always hopeful. But also, how fortunate are we in the legislature that we get to do this work, that we get to work on so many issues. And I just think it is the most wonderful thing in the world to be able to give public service, to be able to be part of solutions and listening to people and trying to bring people together. So, there are hard days and you're tired and you suffer some defeats and you realize you can't afford this or you can't do that. But then there are the incredible days where you pull it together and all of a sudden you do something and there's a parting of the whatever, and you see the solution and people come together and you get it done. And we're struggling every single day to work on those issues: mental health, housing, homelessness. And I just think there's nothing we can't do if we work together.
Thank you for working together with me on this episode, for making this delicious pie. It's really good. Thank you for the gesture of doing that and for joining us on this 100th episode, Madam Pro Tem. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Take the pie with you.
Thank you very much. Senator Pro Tem Toni Atkins from San Diego, the leader of the California State Senate. And that is a wrap for this edition, this 100th episode of Then There's California. We have been and will continue to be a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus, with technical and production assistance from John Roman, Brian Shadden, Michelle Baker, McLeana Woods, Nisha Fritz, and the graphic artistry of Tim Davis. For 100 episodes and counting, I'm Brian Green at the State Capitol in Sacramento. Thank you for listening to Then There's California.